Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to our podcast. We are still the unnamed podcast at this point in time that we're recording. So that's if you haven't heard that story, please go back to our introduction episode and you understand like how we kind of got here and what we're doing. So on today's episode, we thought we would share a little bit about who we are, what has been kind of our journey, because both of us have had a very similar yet different journey. But there's a couple of pieces to it that I think a lot of our listeners will really resonate with, in the fact that both of us have had mental health challenges throughout our lives. And I've had more so than you, obviously, but there that was one of the things, though, I think when we began chatting like a year ago when we met each other, that was one of the things that we were very like transparent with each other on our journeys and our dealings with our mental health, because both of our businesses in some aspects deal with our even clients that we have that deal with some very heavy issues that affect their mental health. So in this episode, we really want to just kind of like share who we are, share our stories on that, share our journey in the mental health issues that we've had, and anything else that we feel like Source needs to let us share. So I'm going to turn it over to my co-host, and she's going to begin by sharing her story and who she is. So I'm super excited about that. So there you go, Diamond.
Thank you so much for queuing that up for me. Super excited to be here, Diamond Drip. And yeah, so I grew up with a mom who was undiagnosed borderline personality disorder. And so what comes with that is taking on a lot of her stuff as my own, a lot of conditioning and my beliefs, my just my outlook on the world. And so as a consequence, when I was 14, I was actually diagnosed with bipolar 2 disorder. And it was one of those things where I didn't really think anything of it at the time. Of course, now I understand why, open and inflexible mind. But at the time, I was just like, people get diagnosed with stuff. Like, people have depression, people have PTSD. I don't really know much about this bipolar thing, but if I check whatever certain set of criteria, then okay. And I just kind of accepted it. As I was removed from my mom's care due to child abuse and neglect, I started to begin to discover who I was outside of her. And that was a really eye-opening experience in terms of feeling free. She had a lot of traits in her that were very controlling. And so when you become a child of the system, like, yeah, technically you belong to the system, but also you're basically an adult, like on your own independence, like you have to look out for you kind of deal. And it was just one of those situations where it really taught me a lot. And fast forward in finding myself, I met my dad when I was removed from my mom. I went to go live with him for a little bit. And to say that trying to establish a relationship with someone that you hadn't really met, known, grew up with, and they're trying to give you guidance on like how to live your life, and you're like, I don't even really know you. It was a very difficult situation. And so because I didn't really have that, obviously I had guidance as a teenager, but like I didn't really have that true guidance that I needed. Like the way that I guide myself now, like I didn't have that. And so what did I turn to? What society said was what we're supposed to do. So I was in high school. You get out of high school, you either go to university, you go to community college, you go to the military, you get a job. Where I grew up, people did not take gap years. I know that's a thing, but we didn't do that in my community. And so out of high school, I went into the military. And from what I understood about the military, like if you get in, you may not do what you want, but if you stay in, you can be set up for life, essentially, with the pensions and the whatever benefits, all of that stuff. And so as much as I tried, I really did try to fit in, I guess, in the military. The distinction between bipolar 1 and bipolar 2. Bipolar 1 is very much the mania that you think of. You think of promiscuity. You think of spending money that you don't have. You think of these massive extremes, hot and cold. But with bipolar 2, it's definitely kind of the opposite. So whereas people who have bipolar 1 have these really big highs and then they kind of dip, and then they have these really big highs, bipolar 2 people have really big lows. And then we get a little bit of a high in this thing called hypomania, where we feel like we can do anything and we're on top of the world, but then we go back to being in that low. And so in the military, I had an experience where I was not around people that I knew. I had just entered into a relationship before I went into the military, and I was just feeling really alone, really unsupported, because I mean, yeah, they ask you about your mental health on a form, but do they really care? I didn't really get that sentiment. And so everyone knows if you want to stay in, especially early on, they ask you on the form about depressive symptoms, like, have you had trouble sleeping? Have you been sad for more than 2 weeks? Have you blah, 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 blah. And everyone knows you say no if you want to stay in. Like, you don't admit to those things. And so about 5 months in, I'd had enough. And I was like, I graduated basic. I saw a lot of people fall out at basic because they couldn't hack it. I hacked it, made it through basic. I made it through the first part of tech school. And second part of tech school, they sent me to this place called Wichita Falls, Texas, which I only knew Wichita Falls, Kansas. So I was like, there's a place in Texas. And the depression was just, it was debilitating. I hadn't really had a lot of suicidal ideations. I had kept them under bay, but when I was in Wichita Falls, Texas, it was one of those things where it was like, I miss my people and I am not doing what I love. Because that was the other part. Like, I have always been a creative. I've always loved making art. I've always loved that. But I knew that those positions weren't a lot in the military. So I knew if I wanted to get in, I would have to accept something and maybe transfer into something else. But things did not look great in Wichita Falls, Texas, because I was like, I don't want to be stuck doing this for the next 4 to however many years you have to be in to really get the benefits. And so I answered honestly to the questions on the form, and it landed me in the hospital. And so it was through that whole experience that I realized, I didn't really have I guess you could say, in the terms that I know them in now, because I don't have any language from back then, but just the willpower to sustain something that didn't bring me joy and it didn't make me happy. And so when I got home, right, I was like, all right, well, that didn't work. That was supposed to pay for college. Got a few credits, no degree in that. So I was like, well, I got to get a job because I'm got to pay for college on my own now. So got to get a job. And it was there that I started to climb the corporate ladder. And corporate, as we know, we've heard it all before, like, corporate does something to you. Like, some people say, like, it sucks the soul out of you, just like slowly drains you. And I fought it, but I do see that narrative playing out a lot. And so even though I climbed the ladder, I became the general manager of my own location. I work for a gym. And even though I climbed the ladder, I wasn't happy. And so when I lost my job due to the company losing its lease, I was like, what am I going to do now? Luckily, I had already like started school by that time. I had saved up enough to, wow, I'm like speeding through my story right now. I had saved up enough to get into school. I had had a daughter by this point. She was three or four when I lost my job. And I was like, you know what? I wanted to apply for other general manager positions, but I was like, I really hate sales. Like that was it. That was the thing for me, right? Joke's on me because I chose entrepreneurship, which is selling all the time. Oh man. But I really just
Humorous.
huh?
Horse's way of being humorous.
I know, right? Oh, you don't like selling, huh? Okay. Start your own business. Um, but it was one of those things that needed to happen because that was when I really started to gain like real control over my life. I had moved into my first like real official person apartment. Like I wasn't subleasing somewhere, I wasn't staying with someone. Like I actually signed documentation to get an apartment. And I was like, okay, how do we keep this thing going? And that was when I started my first business. It was a product-based business. And again, it was one of those things that when I look back on it, I started it out of necessity because I was like, I just signed this lease. And literally the day that I was moving into the apartment, that's when I got the phone call that I no longer had a job. I was unpacking boxes from my U-Haul. And they were like,
Oh,
hey,
wow.
yeah. They were like, hey, I literally put a box down and answered the phone. And they're like, hey, you don't have a job. But good news, you qualify for unemployment, which
Oh, yeah.
as we know is not livable.
No.
So I was like, entrepreneurship, right? Take a chance on me. I don't want to go back to corporate. I don't want to put my financial future into the hands of somebody else. The only calls that I was getting back were for sales positions. I was like, I don't want to do that. So I started the first business. It was a product-based business. And it was one of those things where it wasn't really what I loved. It was just what I liked enough to do it in order to make money from it. And so there were things about it that I liked, making your own schedule, getting to set your own rates, all of that stuff. Even though I later learned when I started my second business, and that was a service-based business, I was like, products let you grow in the blissful ignorance of your own self-worth because you assign the value to the product. You don't really assign it to you. Like, of course, you have customer service, but like, people are coming to you because you have a product that they want and the customer service is a bonus. Like it's not. And so when I started my service-based business, it was after my clinical trial. I did a clinical trial that tested the efficacy of psilocybin, which is the active component in magic mushrooms, in individuals with bipolar 2 disorder. And so that trial, it gave me so much. It gave me self-grace. It gave me self-compassion. It gave me self-forgiveness because before that point, I was very much perfectionist persona. And there was always the never-ending to-do list because there was always a bunch of stuff to get done. And when I came out of the trial experience, I was like, I don't want to live my life this way. There are certain things that I like about having a business, but I don't think it's this business. And so I was like, well, what would you do? And one of the things that I realized was that I was actually coaching people. Like part of my customer service was actually coaching people through difficult times and helping them know that they had the strength to do the thing. And then of course people would ask me, like my friends and family, they would ask me about business advice because not a lot of people in my community start businesses, have the courage to really get out there, with their passion and their vision. And so I would get a lot of questions. And so I was like, well, since I'm coaching, and since I'm talking about business, guess I'll go into business coaching. And that served me for a while because it combined a lot of my strengths. It combined the things that I had learned with my visual communications degree. It combined, you know, some of the mindset stuff that I went through, dealing with my mental illness and the psilocybin trial. But again, it was one of those things where I had the knowledge, I had the gifts, I had the skills, but I didn't believe in my ability to do the thing. And so that obviously shows up in sales conversations. Like, I had a few clients when I was doing the business coaching, but it always felt like such hard work trying to get them. And like, don't get me wrong, it is hard work getting clients, but it doesn't have to be if you're aligned. And that was the piece. I wasn't aligned because when I really looked at it, what I wanted to do, if you had to put a label on it, it would be a life coach. But one of the things that I came to understand living in this society is like, I can teach someone, like I can say, you come to me at the beginning of 6 months, not knowing AI, not knowing how to brand yourself, not knowing the tech of video and all of that stuff. In 6 months, you will know those things. It is measurable. You come to me and you feel crappy in January, and in June you still feel crappy. Like, that feels like I didn't do my job. Like, how do you market like feeling good? And it was just one of those things where like my logical brain, it couldn't get there. And so I went into business coaching, and like I said, knowing that it wasn't aligned, it showed up, especially because I went with something that was safe, that people were already asking me about, but it wasn't something that lit me up. So I was always seeking validation. Like, I had a business coach, because business coaches should have business coaches, because there's always stuff changing in business. So I had a business coach, I had a sales coach. At one point I got a life coach, because I was like, what is happening? Like, why is this so hard right now? Like, the business coach, it was first. And it was like, I'm learning these strategies and frameworks, but I see them working for other people and they're not working for me. Like,
Right.
and it makes you feel like, what's wrong with me? Like, they're just doing the thing that they're being taught. And then, so I was like, okay, well, obviously, right, I got the knowledge of the business and the tools and the systems, but it's the sales piece that I'm missing. Sales coach. I'm learning
Right.
all the presentations, and I'm like, okay, something's still missing. And that was, like I said, when I got the life coach, I was like, okay, obviously I need to like do some stuff with my brain, because my brain is against me. Like, I know that I have the skills, but somewhere in there, it's like, no, you don't. You're not good
Right.
enough, right? Imposter syndrome at its finest. You're not good
Right.
enough. You don't know what you're talking about. You're a fraud. And through the work that I was doing with the life coach, that's when I started opening my mind to more spiritual things. One of the first books that she had me get was Neville Goddard, The Power of Awareness.
Great book.
It is. And you know, it's crazy. I read it now and it makes sense. But I'm telling you, when I was reading it back then, I would read it like 2 or 3 times. And I'm like, okay, so consciousness. Consciousness is what? Okay. Awareness, you just, okay. And like some of the stuff, it would make sense. Like, you go in a closet, you close your eyes, you go to a different place. It's when you open your eyes that you realize that you're in a, you know, you didn't really like all of the things. You didn't really leave the closet, things like that. I was like, that makes sense. But like, also, I'm going into a visualization and I'm dreaming of my future self. And then I open my eyes and I'm still in the life that I'm in. And that's depressing. So what am I doing wrong?
Oh,
And so I had been doing the work for about a month and some change with the life coach. And I met someone who was in the spiritual space, and she called herself an intuitive life coach, I think is what she called herself at the time. Now she calls herself the brain unfucker, but she was an intuitive life coach. And the things that she said really resonated. She was able to like read my energy. Like I would come onto a call and I would have on the mask, right? I would have on the mask, everything's fine. And she'd be like, no, it's not. I'm like, why do you know my life? I'm fine. I said I'm fine
all the time.
Oh man. And so she asked me what was my energy. She's asked me if I knew what my energy type was. I was like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. There are energy types. And she was like, yeah, the auras have energy types and blah, blah, blah. Here, it's right. She just sent me a calculator. She was like, here, just look and see what it is. But the calculator she sent, it was like the one that they have on Jovian Archive. And so it just literally gives you like the information of like what you are. And then right at the bottom, it's like, if you want to know more, buy this $50 thing. And I'm like, I don't even know if I want to dive 50 pages deep into this. So
Right.
what do we all do? Go to Google. In my case, I went to YouTube, which is the second largest search engine, right? Google. It's still Google.
Oh, yeah.
And the very first thing that I searched was, what does it mean to be a generator in human design? And the video that I watched, it talked about how generators, when we're lit up and we're doing work that we love, the energy just kind of bubbles up in us and it pours out of us. And anyone in our space just kind of feels like that energy of like, go, 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 and alignment. And it was just one of those things where at that point, right? Because I was doing the business coaching, the sales coaching, the life coaching, I was trying to figure out what my superpower was
Right.
for the business side. I was like, because obviously there's a lot of business coaches right now in the space. And so I was like, what makes me different? Like, I know I talk about mindset, but like there are other business coaches talking about mindset. So like that doesn't really make me a unicorn. And so when I looked up human design, it was one of those things where I knew everywhere I went, people would say, I love your energy. They would say, you know, like your energy is infectious. Like, I love being around you. I love just hearing your insights and things like that. And it was one of those things that was maddening because I was like, how do I monetize that? Like they love this energy thing, but like you can't sell energy and you can't teach somebody how to have your energy. Like that's not a thing. So like, but when I looked at the video, it was something that I was seeing outside of myself and it brought it into me. And every single thing that I looked up, like the generator, the 5-1 profile, the like everything that was in my human design chart, it all fit. It all felt like I was coming home to myself. Some of the things that I made myself wrong for in the past were things that were actually designed in me. Like, and it's one of those things where the deeper you get into it, if you're designed to be something and you're living your authentic version of you, you can't possibly be wrong for doing something that you're designed to do. And I was like, this is what was missing because it helped me start to see the value and the worth in me. It helped me to see the blind spots where I let society's beliefs become my own. And those were areas where I knew that I needed to form my own beliefs. And so obviously, like you said, the universe is funny sometimes because the very thing that I resisted for so long, helping people feel better, use their energy better, like, yes, I still help people with their business, but I get to say, before we even talk about what your niche is, we have to know who you are, like at a core level. And so the very thing that I was scared of is now the thing that gives me so much joy to help other people like discover and do. So that's the most shortened that I could get that story.
I love it. I know talking about this episode. We're like, we're just gonna let the recorder just go because we have no idea where this conversation is gonna go. And I have a couple of questions though, so I'm gonna throw a couple of things at you.
Okay.
Because I think it's very interesting because one of the things that Diamond and I had very which is very interesting. We both use different modalities and tools to help our clients, but a lot of times they come to this similar outcome. And so it's very interesting because she's talking about human design. So if you don't know what human design is, please keep listening to our podcast or reach out to Diamond because Diamond does a lot of work in the human design space. And I was introduced to human design probably 5 or 6 years ago. And I ran my chart, did the jovial thing, went out on YouTube, all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, okay, I already know all this stuff about myself. Like that was the way I interpret it. Now I have a lot of age on Diamond. So like there was things in it and I was like, okay, well, yeah, I know that stuff. So what am I supposed to do with it? That was the big question to me. So when you first got like your chart and you didn't know the jargon, that's what I think most people are like, oh, I can't use these tools because I don't know the jargon. I don't know what they mean. I don't know what they do. When you first got it and you were looking at it from this very logical, very like earthly 3D-ish. I know people who are listening are probably like, what the heck is she talking about? But like it was very much like man made thinking, like our typical business masculine view lens that we have a lot of times in business. And human design kind of blows that out of the water. So how did you feel like initially when you read that and you're like, well, yeah, I kind of know this about myself, like, but now what? That I know you went through that process. So kind of share with us a little bit about like what happened in that process for you.
You know what's crazy is I think I did have that, but now what? And so that just really ignited the one in me. And like you said, we're going to get more into human design later, but for the listeners, if you have a one in your profile, you have the archetype of like the investigator, the researcher. You like getting to the bottom of things. You like seeking a strong foundation of information before you feel like you can go public with it, in a sense. And so, I was like, everything that I found, it was just one of those things like, what is this? This is me. What is this? This is me. And then someone sent me the book, the Big Daddy Human Design book that was written by Rachael and co-written by Lydia. I think her last name is Burnell. And that book is like almost 500 pages. And most people are like, I don't have time to read a 500-page book. But because everything that I was watching on YouTube, everything that I was looking up, I was like, if these are the people that created this synthesis or, put the words to it, like I need to dive into this. And it was through reading the book and seeing how things showed up interpersonally, how it talked about conditioning, those things. It was one of those things where it was like, even though the logic in me was like, I don't know how I explain this to other people, it was one of those things where like, right, a lot of people say spirit was like telling, like kind of like pulling me along on this path. And I didn't really know how I was gonna tie it in, really. I just knew that the deeper I dove into it, the better understanding that I had of it, I would be able to explain it in a way to where it would make sense. And it really started to challenge me. Like that whole seeking a firm foundation of information thing before you go to the public, like that was something that, and of course, I could have waited, right? Now that I know about like emotional authority and all of that, like I probably should have waited a little bit more. But like it was one of those things where it was like, I don't know how I'm going to say this, but I just feel like I need to say something. And so for like a little while in my brand messaging on social media, like it just kind of looked like I just took an abrupt like switch. Like I was talking about like me, my life, things like that. And then all of a sudden I was talking about like your authority and your strategy and these energy types. And people were like, what are you talking about? And I was like, okay, so that wasn't the language that, yeah, like how I learn it and understand it and I get excited about it, like I have to find a different way to like say it to other people. So it was through research that it really all like came together and I started to find the words. And even now, like I'm just now getting to a point where I can say it succinctly, right? Where people are like, oh, okay, I get it in a snapshot without me droning on for 5 minutes about what is human design.
Awesome. I love it because I'm a 5-1 as well, as
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And so, which is really interesting because when Diamond and I talked about it, like we have the same sun signs, we got the same numbers in our human design, a little bit different locations, but we're 5-1. And then I do use a different tool, and it was funny because her chart and my chart kind of look very similar, but we kind of have our numbers in different spots. And I was like, this is really going to be fun because we have similar ways of doing things, but how we go about doing them is very, very differently. And I love how God created us all so uniquely like that. But I'm also super grateful that we have tools now that can help us in those spaces to understand ourselves more. And so I remember Diamond kind of going through this whole metamorphosis in the last year of like, she talked a little bit about human design. And I remember we had a conversation and I was like, why don't you like, because I have, my soul contracts as part of my business. And I was like, why don't you do it? We kind of bantered back and forth a little bit about it. And then I saw, the whole social media blurbs, and then it was gone, it was back, and then it was gone. And it was so interesting to watch that process because that's part of the story. Like that's part of the journey that's how, for you and I, at least, that's part of our journey here is that our life is our story, and it is for everybody, but our life is also our business. Like how we accomplish things and how we manifest those things and how we produce those things, that is our business. Like we are our business, like we are our ideal client type thing. And I always find that funny because it's usually like those of us who are like not so great at putting ourselves out there, which is, I think, is funny because 5-1s don't like to put themselves out there. We like to be behind, like looking at the books, knowing everything. And I have that trouble. Like sometimes I know how I think about it. And then when I go to explain it to somebody, it's like a complete, like, semester long class, or I talk to somebody and it completely goes over their head because the way I know it and the way I say it doesn't always convert. So I love that you were sharing that, like that journey, because that is part of the story. But it also, like, our topic of this episode is about our mental health. And it also, I think, like when I was looking at my human design and then when I moved into working with soul contract, like it really helped me understand like where my threshold with my mental health really gets like pushed. And so when there's certain things that come up for me, like I know like sometimes I have to take maybe an extra day or two just to decompress from certain things. Or if I'm going to be traveling a lot, like I have to do certain things to care for myself because I know that can really like overload my energetic system. And so I think they're wonderful tools. So awesome. Thank you for sharing your story with us. And one of these days we'll get back to talking about the clinical trial and all that kind of stuff, because as I share my story here in a few minutes, you're going to see some of this intertwining, I think is really, really cool with Diamond and I's story. So, but I do appreciate you being willing to tear off that mask for today and share with us that story.
Right.
Because for those